I'm representing the Adult Education Committee this morning. We have a special program of poetry. And you might ask, what role does poetry play in our lives? When you want to establish an autocracy, first kill all the poets. That's from Size, Art of War, and also from David Newhoff. In 2021, over 30 poets were imprisoned in Myanmar and 4 were killed. We also celebrate the Night of the Murdered Poets, September 48th and June 49 in Russia. Poets were accused of treason. What we do is we tell the truth, and that may make us some of the most dangerous people in society. So today we're going to celebrate Earth Day, and Kim Lavinger is going to moderate the program today. Kim?
It's no surprise and it's no accident, actually, that Paula began her beautiful sermon with the words of Genesis, which is poetry. And along with the other historical notations that were made, I believe it's Rachel Carson who also helped spark the modern environmental movement with her 1962 book, Silent Spring. And she was a poet as well as a scientist and writer. And I read that she herself got the inspiration for her title, Silent Spring, from yet another poet, John Keats, who wrote in the line that captured her attention, read, "The sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing." And I guess what we found ourselves, maybe by accident, doing is hoping that we can help ourselves and our souls feel that our words and the words of other poets that we've shared and read help the birds sing. And we hope that our little contribution today will sing for you, and that we know that while we are in a crisis in the world, there is still hope because of who we are and who our young people are. This would not have been possible without Kevin Bellows. And I just want to acknowledge her over and over again because this is a small miracle that we're sitting here, and we're kind of in shock because this is not a new group. This group in different faces has gone on for, I don't think centuries, but maybe decades. It's so old no one can tell when the first poetry group met, but there are some hints of when it began, in the 1990s at least. And 70s, see? Maybe it has been centuries ago. But we stand here as the most recent verse in a very long sonnet. We are the most recent verse, I guess, and we are basically the pandemic verse. We gathered together on Zoom just as the pandemic made us realize that we weren't going to be able to meet in person. And many of us joined because we could through Zoom. And this is, right now, sitting here, this is our first in-person reading. So this is for us as much as it is for you. We are gathered here today in person. Thanks also to Steve Mack, who's representing Mary, but of course, we know Steve also as an author, as a poet and writer and scientist. But we want to please make sure that you know that Mary's library of poetry books behind you represents a life of love of the written word and the spoken word, of history, of nature, and we are just a small representation of that, of those loves that Mary represented. And we want to be sure that you all take at least an armful of her books and maybe even pay special attention to those that have little stickies on them, because those were obviously special poems. But please do take as many poetry books as you can. And thank you, Steve. Mary was a huge part of this group for many years, and we're delighted that she could also be here.
And Gay McDonald had a good idea. She's taking one to give away to someone who will really appreciate it. So take
Yes.
it for yourself.
Yes.
And for someone else.
So if you have enough books at home, please don't hesitate to take for others. There's nothing more special than a gift of poems. So we are now going to present our small gift of poetry to you. Thank you for coming. I can't say that we are John Keats, Rachel Carson, or the writer of Genesis, but we're a small little group, and we have been blessed to learn so much from each other with Kevin's leadership. And I'll just say this, that there's something infinitely healing in the repeated refrains of nature, the assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. Rachel Carson. And Kevin, please.
Things to hold on to on the way here. I don't think I can. Well, this is just such a wonderful pleasure for me, of course. People have asked me to say a little bit about the poetry group, which has been going for some time. Most of us can't remember. I can't remember anything, but I certainly can't remember when it started. It was the brainchild, really, of Peggy Crum, who was the associate pastor here many years ago. And she was a poetry lover, and she knew that I wrote poetry and taught poetry. And so she said, why don't you teach a class at the church? And I said, well, do you think there'd be people who'd be interested in that? And she said, oh, I think there'd be a bunch of people. And one of the first people to show up was Conrad, who was sitting here, who was one of our early poets, and a very fine poet indeed. And then, of course, Mary. I have to say a word about Mary. Mary showed up, and after one, why is that? Am I too close? Is it blowing back at me?
Yes.
After one session, I said to Mary, I will be more than happy to vacate the position of leadership in your honor. She was a spectacular poet. She said, no, I'm still teaching at UCLA, and I have other obligations, and I would just like to be a student. So teaching Mary was a tall order for me. And Mary was as much a part of this, the leadership of this group as certainly I was. And we all miss her dearly. Let's see, I would guess we did a couple of books, actually. We did an Advent book, right? And we did another. Easter, yeah. So I think those books are still around somewhere. I'm sure in the church library. But we were inspired by Scripture to write poems for those sacred times of the church here. And that was really great fun. We had a lot of fun doing that. And Alice, I have to say, Alice Romano, who is not here today, she had the audacity to move to New York. Alice was responsible for the books. She took over the production of the books. It was just no small feat. And of course, our budgets were not noteworthy for producing those books, and Alice made it happen. So there's a then come in, honey. Come in. And so there's like a memory of the poetry group in the books in the library, which are very fun. Okay, now here's what we're doing today. We decided to actually, Cart was the prime mover behind this as a member of the education committee, and he got help my with the names. Our wonderful Jake. There we go. Jake, and he designed this whole event, which was great, fun for me. And of course, I'm now living in San Francisco, but I couldn't miss this opportunity to be with all of you again and to celebrate on so many years. Someday somebody will figure out how many. I think each of us will say a little bit about the poem we're going to read, just to give you a little context. The poem that I'm going to read is called "The Weatherman," and it came directly from a television broadcast that I was watching after the decimation in Florida a few months ago, and it was simply, I don't know, I'm sure you all saw it. It was hard to watch. I mean, it was just impossible to believe that this had happened to someplace in the United States. So here it is, "The Weatherman." At the end of the telecast, he stood by his whiteboard, displaying a stunning list. The worst hurricanes hurtling through the U.S. in recent years, ever more frequently, leaving more death and destruction, costing more and more billions. On the screen next to him, an image of a hill of sticks that used to be a neighborhood. He bowed his head and said, "God, help us." Thank you.
So thank you, Kevin. We're going to go down our row here and just share one of our, does it need to be? We'll go down the row, and each of us has chosen a poem that we wrote during these past months and years that have to do with nature in one form or the other. And instead of stopping each time, I just want to introduce, besides you, I think you all know all of us, but Kevin, of course, you know and have met Kevin Bellows. There's Jim Louie, Katie Mahler. Then we have Carol Carruthers, Gay McDonald, we have Jen Williams, Carlton,
Bailey.
I'm sorry,
Bailey.
and
It doesn't matter.
we are on first name basis on Zoom. Steve Mack, and I'm Kim.
And Mary.
And Mary. And Mary. So please enjoy.
I want to take this opportunity to thank all the people on the committee, particularly Kevin and Kim and Mary Mack, for letting people with a great school education in poetry like myself come and teach me not to rhyme, but to discuss priorities of perception. And Kim suggested that I write a poem, and I said, I don't have a poem. So she said, why don't you try haiku? And I said, what is haiku? And she said, 5, 7, and 5 syllables. So I said, yes. And so I wrote something with those syllables. And then this morning, I found that there's a book here that I got from Mary Mack, telling me how to do it, and I apologize, I didn't do it right. Because, like a dumb doctor, I told you what to do instead of giving perceptions. So let me read my haiku to you, and you can laugh as they always do during our committee meetings. Oceans rise, earth dies. Carbon waste predict our lives. Control, no more lies.
Some of those short ones could be read twice.
That's right.
Gay McDonald said even if nobody else came, that we would just have our own reading because we haven't seen each other in person for such a long time. So thank you all for coming. I wrote this poem in 2019, 18, after the Woolsey fire that just decimated Malibu. I'm a docent at Malibu Creek State Park. And this poem is called After. A charred oak limb lay on the smoldering ground, so painful to be wrenched from its mother trunk, as flames roared around it, pierced through it, surrendered at last with a thunderous crash. An anguished wail burst from the gaping trunk hole, a sob for its lost limb, for the ashes of sage and deerweed, for the blackened sycamore, for the small animal bones. Silence unearthly as I wandered through the ravaged fields and forests. Suddenly from a half-burnt tree, the sound of a chuckling woodpecker beginning a hole to place her next acorn.
Oh.
Exhale. Morning won't last. Spring will come. I'll pass this little picture. Well, no, I'm not. But if you want to see the picture of this tree. Wait.
I couldn't decide which poem to read, but given the sermon this morning and the scripture, I decided to go with intermezzo, but then I just changed my mind. I'm gonna read Mushroom. I wrote this in the beginning of the pandemic when we were all really locked down. I think I'm becoming a mushroom, spongy, lethargic, spreading out in a dark interior space, hidden in the forest of lockdown, with only shafts of sunlight entering from a high window of sky. Not an exotic, precious form of fungi, not porcini or cremini or truffle, but just an ordinary, plump, white button mushroom. Nonetheless, I so wish someone walking in the woodlands would reach out, pluck me up, toss me exuberantly in a melange of salad experience, shower me with balsamic, set me in a crystal bowl to be savored and enjoyed. But alas, mushrooms are not on the menu today. And then I asked if I could read some of my sister's haikus, which she had written. She was much closer to the earth and nature. She spent all her career working to preserve land back in her beloved Virginia. I was the city girl, she was the country girl. And so these were a few that she wrote. Tiny white violets now carpet the greening hills, April's last snowfall. And then bold taste of terrier, hints of buttercup and lime, wine of new cut grass. And then this is the favorite. She had an oak tree that she would go and visit often, called Mother Oak. So, for Midsummer's Ball, Mother Oak dons dark green velvet to dance with the stars.
One of the scariest, nerviest things I ever did in my life was join a poetry group at WPC. I thought we were just going to talk about poetry, and then the next scariest thing was, no, you have to write a poem and turn it in, and everybody's going to read it and give you feedback. And so I thought, I can't do this. I really can't do this. I think I have to quit. So that was in the early 70s. Kevin had just published a book of poetry, and I guess I could date that poetry group from the date of your first published book of poems, 70-something. Yes, 70-something. That was a little while ago. So we had that poetry group, and then different things happened, and we didn't meet for a while. And then there was the pandemic, and we couldn't meet, but we did decide to be on Zoom. And so we Zoomed each other, and now here we are, the first time that we're actually back in person together, and we're so blessed that Kevin has come all the way down from Northern California to be with us, because she is our guardian angel, our guiding light, our blessed presence, just, you know, the goddess, I think we decided to call her. I know she's probably sitting there wondering when I get to the point and feeling a little embarrassed. You're not embarrassed. No, of course not. So, my poem is about the wildfires in California. At the same time, the great swaths of tundra and taiga were burning on land made newly vulnerable to the ravages of fire by the changing climate. And so this is a fire monster that was in California, but there were fire monsters all over the face of the earth. The fire monster arrived with a thunderous bolt, landed among dry grasses, licked at them. Ominously, the invader liked them. Greedily, it extended its reach, starving for fodder, tasted the base of a tree. That was also to its taste. The ravening beast raced, wind added along hilltops, expanded its great maw, engulfed a county. A fiend, it feasted there. Strengthened, it roared ahead, consuming all in its path. Unstoppable, it tore through fields, forests, towns. An army of fire, a marching inferno. California paradise turned to California hell on earth. Devilish, rolling, lightning fast forward, left a landscape ash gray, black. Burnt skeletons of trees, stones, as if the fireplace bones of homes, contorted remnants of cars and trucks, even a fire truck. Unimaginably, impossibly, bodies strewn, grisly leftovers of a barbarian banquet. No bell left to toll their loss. Still, silent, dead.
I also want to add my gratitude for Kevin's leading us along these paths and for being able to share it with all the members of this group. It has been one of the great joys to be part of this group and to have this within our church community. And what did I do, step on something?
The blue knob, turn it down just a little bit.
Blue knob. Is that better?
That's better.
Thanks. It really does nourish the soul, and it's an incredible resource. During the pandemic, I think one of the things that helped me a great deal was having my garden. And some of you have taken lemons home from my tree, and I've brought my tomatoes to women's morning prayer breakfast and shared them. So I do think being able to witness the cycles of Mother Nature during the pandemic really helped me a great deal, and that's where this poem comes from. The taste of summer. A small pod, coral and lime green colored, breaks open to 6 skinny shards, releasing a 7-petal, pale yellow bloom. A burst of brightness against green, blue, purple sprays of leaves. Morning after morning of warm California gold light encourages a globe of white-green, nearly translucent. More mornings, and the skin bears streaks of green-yellow. Ribbons dissolve to yellow, yellow-orange, pure orange, and red-orange, until finally red seeps into every curve of the sphere. full chromatic red penetrates the entire tomato with just a quick nod at blue. This red, not the black red of blood, nor the thinner happy red of Valentine's Day cards, but the soaked, sun-drenched, packed, deep, full taste of summer, red.
I read in the paper that we are losing the bee. And sometimes it's the small things that we don't notice that may cut the deepest. This poem is connection. The fragile symbiosis between man and nature, ever fraught with danger. Notice the mighty bee that gives life to the flowers we see. Those flowers in turn sustain us and return to us and nature both food and pleasure. Break that connection, we see a stark reflection as we fail to realize our own demise. The vanishing bee is no longer free to save our lives. We seek to control nature, too many pesticides and wanton construction to save the bee's habitat from reaching destruction. We plot against nature to take what we can. This is our land, to abuse as we see fit, not realizing that it is a losing war. We must see if the earth is gone, so are we.
Today's a tough day for me, so pardon me if I break up. Mary, when we first met, thought that I was a poet. I'm not. I seek poetry. But I like poetry, and I joined the poetry group briefly, and Kevin used to tell us what you should do is write about what you know, what you experience. So I'm going to take the liberty of being one of the last persons, because Kim said I could say one of my poems. And I don't have any with me, but I do remember the first verse of a poem that was inspired by walking my dog, Tigger, in the neighborhood. I wrote several poems about coyotes, but this one happened one night when I was walking along and I heard these two owls. And they both sounded equally loud, but they're clearly coming from different directions. So I wrote a poem that started like this, and I'll tell you the first stanza, which is all I remember, and then tell you a little bit about how it ends. There are two owls in our neighborhood. Woo-hoo, woo-hoo. They call to one another from wood to wood. Woo-hoo, woo-hoo. And then it goes on, and it talks about the cycle of nature, where, you know, the owls has a perspective of a little mouse or a vole who's out there and hears the owls, and then it goes hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo, always. And then there's a point at which you're missing a hoo-hoo, because the owl has swooped down. And we left the poem not quite understanding whether what we think might happen actually happened. And that's how the poem was. One of the things that I do in poem, and I know Jim Louis likes to do, is to rhyme. As you heard from this whole group, poems don't have to rhyme. So I'm going to read you one of Mary's poems. There's one that was kind enough to have gotten put on the beginning of the bulletin today. And just for your information, that was written in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. And if anyone wants to know, there is a series on this, and I have two others here which I won't read, but you can look at afterwards. This one, though, which was chosen for me to read, I'm going to read Mary's description at the end of it first to give you context. The symbol of Turkey. Turkey's been in the news a lot lately. In particular, there are two flowers attributed with spiritual meanings, the rose and the tulip. While the rose is a symbol of Prophet Muhammad, and we spent a year and a half in Senegal, a Muslim country, the tulip represents the Creator, God. According to religious accounts, the tulip resembles the written word of God, the written name of God in the Arabic language, Allah. Interestingly enough, both words are written with the same letters in the Ottoman language. Similar to a mosque, a tulip's blossom looks like a dome, and its leaves are reminiscent of minarets. Tulips are associated with God's Tawhid, the doctrine of oneness, because a tulip seed blossoms with only one branch. Okay, so that's the background. Here's the poem by Mary. Ode to a Vase of Tulips. Fiery scarlet, tulips edged with gold. You open wide as newborn eyes, so surprised by the brightness of the world. Excuse me. Flaming petals reveal your center. Dark as embers, black as the dirt you fed on, rooted deep in the intricate web of earth. Fiery tulips without heat or smoke or ash, not consumed, an ancient sign of the holy. So, that's all the poetry that we're going to be reading. But there are 9 boxes of books back there, and we want you to all go away. Somebody said 20 books each? For those in the room, each of you, feel free to take as many as you want, because I don't want to move them, and in fact I already have a box or 2 at home that I am moving. So these are all to be given away. And I want to thank the poetry group, because in her last couple of weeks of life, thank you, Reverend Chakoyan had suggested that Mary participate in some Zoom meetings with people from church. And she was in denial and wasn't wanting to do that. But the poetry group, thanks to Kim, got together. And we were in the East Coast, and they changed the time of their meeting so that Mary could participate. And she did. And as you heard here, it's a good group. And people laughed. And people were normal. And they read their poems and we critiqued them. And she thanked me so much afterwards. It was very, very meaningful. So, I'm going to end with this. Any of you who think you can't write poetry, it's not true. You can. Just put something down, come to the group. Kevin and Kim and everybody will offer comments and help you improve your poetry writing. So it's been here a long time. It's only going to be here a long time further if you join. So I think that's it.
One final one.
One final one. All right. And then please look at the book.
I didn't save mine for last intentionally, but I wanted Steve to have the final word. But I will say that with his words as the beginning of the future in poetry for any of us will occur if we simply walk out and notice, as Carlton said this, or many of us have said, the small things. And this, in closing, goes back to Paula's beginning, entitled Creation. Can you hear? Okay. Ethereal dragonflies hover over the pond in silent starts and stops. Sunlight catches their lace-winged iridescence in stained glass blues and greens. Crested bulbuls, silhouetted on branches above, call and respond from tree to tree to tree, a choral vesper in the golden light. Spicy incense of bricklebush and sage waft through rustic canyons and settle on the balmy edge of night. And at last, the heavy-lidded day lays down its burdens among the shadows and summons silver stars, one by shimmering one, to vigils distant and divine. With a benediction such as this, we are blessed in the knowing that the tender work of creation is good and is not yet over after all. Thank you so much for allowing us to share in person our words with you. And please don't leave without a copy of them and many of Mary's treasures. Thank you.